The night was thick with mist, curling like pale smoke around the black stones of the Tower of London. Torches hissed in the damp air, their light flickering across the ancient walls where history and blood had long mingled. Somewhere in that silence, broken only by the caw of a distant raven, came a whisper, a woman's voice, soft, cold, unmistakable. "Did you think I would rest?" The guards shuddered. They'd heard tales before, of course. Every man who patrolled these walls had. But on this night, the stories didn't feel like distant rumors. They felt alive, pressing against their skin like the chill of unseen hands. One of them crossed himself hurriedly. Another clenched his spear tighter, for what haunted the tower was no ordinary ghost. It was Anne Boleyn, the queen who had once dazzled the court with her wit and fire, only to be betrayed, accused, and finally condemned to die by the very man who once swore eternal love to her King Henry VIII. Her end was as swift as it was brutal, a French swordsman summoned to sever her head with a single stroke. Yet death had not been her conclusion. It was, instead, the beginning of a darker reign. Witnesses swore that her headless figure still walked the tower grounds at night, her silken gown sweeping silently along the stones. Some said she carried her severed head tucked beneath her arm, her dark eyes still burning with fury. Others claimed they heard her voice, a warning, a curse, a lament, that echoed through the corridors where she had once prayed for mercy. But what most feared, and few dared to speak aloud, was the rumor of her vengeance. For Anne's spirit, restless and unyielding, was said to seek justice not only against the king who had betrayed her, but against all who had carried his legacy forward. The courtiers, the heirs, the sycophants who fed the flames of her downfall, and the tower, soaked in centuries of blood, seemed to pulse with her anger, as though every stone remembered the crime committed against her. On this night, as the whisper curled through the mist, the guards knew something was stirring, something far stronger than a story, meant to frighten children. The air grew heavy, the torches dimmed, and from the shadows came the faint echo of a woman's laugh. A laugh without warmth, a laugh that promised reckoning. Anne Boleyn, once a queen betrayed, had returned, and she would not be silenced. The tower's stones breathed with memory. Each corridor, each chamber seemed to hold echoes of footsteps long gone. On this night, however, the sound was not an echo. It was real, slow, measured, deliberate. A guard named Thomas clutched his spear, sweat beading on his brow. He had heard the tales since childhood of Anne Boleyn's ghost, but never had the fear clawed at his chest as it did now. Ahead, the mist thickened into a shape. A woman. Her gown shimmered pale silver, though no light touched it. And then he saw what froze his breath. Her face, her eyes dark and unblinking, bore into him with a gaze that was both sorrowful and vengeful, as if centuries of betrayal lived inside them. Though her lips did not move, her voice was clear in his mind. "Why do you guard the stones that kept me prisoner?" Thomas staggered back. I serve the crown, my lady." "The crown," she repeated, her voice cutting like broken glass. "A crown that devoured me." She stepped closer. Her gown whispered against the ground, though her feet did not touch it. Thomas wanted to flee, but his legs betrayed him, rooted to the cold stones. Around them the torches sputtered and died one by one, until the corridor lay in near darkness. Only her eyes glowed faintly, like embers in the night. Then, in a chilling gesture, Anne lifted her hands. Between them appeared her head, severed clean at the neck, her features serene yet accusatory, her lips slightly parted, as though ready to pronounce judgment. Thomas gasped and dropped his spear, falling to his knees. "Mercy," he whispered. Anne's head tilted. "Did Henry grant me mercy? Did the courtiers beg for my life when they knew the lies against me? No, Thomas, and yet you ask it now." A sharp wind tore through the corridor, scattering dust and rattling the iron doors. Thomas cried out, covering his ears as her Laughter rang through the chamber, a sound more terrifying than any scream. But just as suddenly the vision dimmed. Anne was gone, leaving only the faint smell of roses and blood. Thomas stumbled out of the tower at dawn, his hair turned streaks of white, his eyes hollow. To his dying day he would speak of that encounter, warning all who served within those cursed walls. The Queen walked still, and her fury was not spent, but whispers grew darker. Anne was no longer content with haunting guards. Her spirit, restless and bold, was beginning to step beyond the tower itself. London moved on. Centuries passed. Kings rose and fell. And yet the shadow of Anne Boleyn lingered. The tower kept its silence, but beyond its walls, stories began to seep into the city's heart like a slow poison. It was 1625 when the first whispers emerged from Whitehall Palace. Servants swore they saw a pale woman in a jeweled gown drifting through the corridors where Henry VIII once feasted. She did not speak, but her headless form paused before portraits of monarchs, her hand brushing the gilded frames as though mocking the bloodline that had betrayed her. Soon her appearances grew bolder. At Hampton Court, a nobleman reported waking in the dead of night to find her, sitting at the foot of his bed. She stared without blinking, her severed head resting calmly in her lap. When he screamed, she vanished, leaving the sheets drenched in icy dew. He was found the next morning trembling, unable to utter a single word ever again. It was clear. Anne's spirit was no longer bound to the tower. She had carried her vengeance into the very palaces where she once walked in life, and wherever she appeared, misfortune followed. Crops withered in fields surrounding, estates whose lords had whispered against her during her trial. Heirs to noble houses sickened mysteriously, their lineages fading into ruin. A queen consort of later years confessed in hushed tones to her ladies-in-waiting that she often dreamt of Anne standing at her bedside, whispering, "Remember what power can cost." Historians dismissed the tales as superstition, yet even they could not ignore one chilling pattern. Those who prospered most from Anne's fall seemed to suffer strange and untimely downfalls of their own. By the 18th century, her legend had grown into something more sinister. Crowds gathered outside the tower on stormy nights, hoping to catch a glimpse of her spectral procession, the pale figure gliding through the courtyard, clutching her head beneath her arm. Some said that on these nights, lightning always struck the same turret, as if heaven itself echoed her rage. But the most unsettling account came from a priest who served at St. Peter ad Vincula, the chapel where Anne's body lay buried beneath unmarked stones. One evening while praying, he felt a cold hand touch his shoulder. Turning, he saw her, her eyes alight with sorrow, her lips forming words he could not hear. Before she vanished, he noticed something more terrifying than her presence itself. The shadow she cast was not her own, but Henry's, crown gleaming atop his head. The priest fled, convinced that Anne's vengeance was not merely against her betrayers, but against the throne itself. The centuries did little to quiet her. If anything, Anne's presence grew stronger, as though each retelling of her tragedy fed the fire of her ghostly reign. By the 19th century, tourists flocked to the Tower of London, eager to glimpse its haunted history. Few realized the danger that came with invoking her name too freely. One such visitor was Lady Eleanor Whitcomb, a woman of wealth and arrogance who scoffed at superstition. During a private tour, she laughed when the guide spoke of Anne's ghost, a fairy tale, she declared, her voice echoing against the chapel walls. A beheaded queen cannot harm the living. But that night, lodged in her grand home along the Thames, Eleanor awoke to the sound of weeping. She lit a candle, her eyes darting across the chamber. There, standing beside her mirror, was Anne. Her figure glowed faintly, her gown torn and crimson at the collar. In her hands, she held her head, not as a burden, but as a weapon. "Doubt me still." Anne's voice was a whisper that shook the room. The candlelight sputtered. Eleanor shrieked, clutching at her chest as the apparition leaned closer, her eyes burning with a grief that had sharpened into fury. The next morning, Eleanor was found pale and lifeless, her face twisted into an expression of frozen terror. From that day, no guide at the tower dared dismiss the Queen's ghost as myth, and yet her appearances were not confined to punishment. Some witnesses described her as sorrowful, a queen forever searching for justice. On winter nights, her ghost was seen kneeling at the chapel altar, hands clasped in silent prayer. Others swore she wandered the grounds, headless but not hostile, as though reminding the world of the price she had paid. Still, a darker truth lingered. Her vengeance seemed to ripple through England's monarchy itself. Wars, betrayals, and scandals haunted the royal line like echoes of her downfall. Even in modern times, whispers grew louder whenever a royal marriage faltered or a crown trembled under scandal. Anne has not forgiven. The people murmured. Anne waits still. And now, in the present day, her legend has stirred again. Guards at the tower, equipped with cameras and radios instead of swords, report strange figures gliding across their monitors, figures that vanish when approached. Tourists faint at the sensation of invisible hands brushing against their throats. Electronic devices fail inexplicably near the chapel where Anne rests. The question is no longer whether Anne Boleyn haunts the tower. The question is this: after nearly 5 centuries of unrest, what final act is she waiting for? The tower stands eternal, its stones scarred yet unyielding, a monument to betrayal and blood. Tourists crowd its gates, laughter and curiosity filling the air. Yet beneath the surface, in the silence between heartbeats, something stirs. Anne Boleyn has never left, and perhaps she never will. On a storm-laden evening not long ago, a group of historians was granted rare access to St. Peter ad Vincula, the chapel where Anne lies. They came not as believers, but as skeptics determined to debunk centuries of ghostly tales. With cameras poised and recorders humming, they set about their vigil. The storm grew heavier, thunder rolling above as rain lashed against the ancient glass. Midnight struck, and then, without warning, every candle in the chapel extinguished. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of roses and iron. One of the historians gasped, clutching his chest as a shadow passed over him. Yet no one stood near. Then they saw her. Anne appeared in the aisle, her gown gleaming as though woven from moonlight, her severed head cradled gently in her hands. Her eyes were alive, aflame with grief and wrath. She moved slowly toward the altar, where she raised her head high, and in that instant, her voice filled the chapel, not soft, not whispering, but clear, commanding, unrelenting. I was betrayed. I was silenced, but I am remembered. The walls seemed to tremble. Dust fell from the rafters as her words echoed like thunder. The historians, pale with terror, dropped their equipment and fell to their knees, for what they witnessed was not simply a haunting. It was a reckoning. Anne placed her head upon the altar. A great crack of lightning split the sky, illuminating the chapel's windows in a blaze of white fire. When the light faded, she was gone, but etched into the altar stone, glowing faintly as if carved by unseen hands, was a single phrase. Injustice never sleeps. The historians fled, their footage mysteriously corrupted, their accounts fragmented by fear. Yet one truth burned in their minds. Anne Boleyn's ghost had not sought peace, but remembrance. Her story was not buried with her body. It lived on, a warning across the centuries. Even now, those who dare to walk the tower grounds after dark claim they hear her steps behind them, light yet deliberate. Some say she walks without her head, others that her spirit appears whole, regal, her crown gleaming with a power even Henry could not destroy. And perhaps that is her final revenge, not terror, not curses, but endurance. Anne Boleyn, once betrayed and broken, has become eternal, a queen still, commanding the memory of all who enter her shadow. Her reign may have ended with the fall of a sword, but her ghostly crown has never been taken, fascinated by the haunting tale of Anne Boleyn's ghostly revenge. Don't forget to subscribe for more spine-chilling stories from history's darkest corners. If this mystery gripped you, hit that like button. And tell me in the comments, do you believe Anne's spirit still roams the Tower of London?